Hey there, welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph and I am the host of this show, a show that is dedicated to progressive rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and other forms of rock music. Just want to do a couple things here, make sure everything's adjusted right. Anyways, welcome to my Wednesday night show, which is my Wednesday night favorites. I had originally planned to do a different show than I was going to do tonight, and then I got an album on the weekend and decided that, you know what, I haven't done many of these, so now that I have this entire collection, I should do this ranking albums. So it's a ranking album show. We'll be doing ranking the albums of this group. I just want to get one out here that shows the name. Led Zeppelin. We're going to be doing the Led Zeppelin ranking and they have 9 studio albums, and that's what we're going to be ranking, the studio albums of Led Zeppelin. Normally how I do this, if you've watched any of my other ranking shows, I've only done a few. I'm not a huge ranker of albums. Prefer to talk about the albums individually than rank them, but there gets to a point where you kind of have to do something. So I decided that today, since I got the album I was missing from the set, which ironically was the first one I ever owned, but I never got it again. So anyways, I decided to do the ranking of the Led Zeppelin catalog. So, as many people know, Led Zeppelin is one of the greatest rock bands in history of music. Some would say it's the greatest. I'm not going to dispute that. I like them quite a bit. They're not in my group of 8. And for those of you who know me, I have a group of 8 that I love quite a bit. And then they're probably the next band, though. The next band outside of that group of 8. So they'd be my favorite non-group of 8 band, if that's what you want to go with. So they'd be number 9, right? So anyways, coincidentally, there's 9 studio albums in this discography. So how I'm going to rank it is from least to most favorite. And I would say the top 6 here are all fairly interchangeable given the time frame. Some of them, I listen to them quite a bit, and then I get a little bit of an urge to listen to one particular one, and that one may soar to the top, right? And that's the way it is with this group. Only the bottom 3 are kind of a little bit on the weaker side than the top ones, but they're not by no means a bad albums. There's no bad albums in this collection. Let's put it that way. I did include the album that was released after the death of John Bonham. It was all original tracks on it, taken from different eras of the group and put together to make an album. I guess the record label wanted them to finish out their ode, how do you say it? I guess they owed the record label one more album, and they decided to put out this last one. And it's not a bad album, considering it's all not retreads, but previously unreleased tracks from their Zeppelin catalog. And so I put that in there as well. It was actually the first CD one that I had by them. My first album ever owned by them was In Through the Outdoor, which I bought in 1979, right at the time that it came out. I remember the cardboard cover, or whatever you want to call it, that they had covering the album, which was like, what is it? So it's some kind of mysterious thing. You take it off and he's like, okay, I don't get it. Anyways, that was the first album I owned, and I played that a fair amount. And I actually had gotten tickets to see Zeppelin. I think they were playing in Montreal, if I can remember correctly. Mind you, I was only young then. I don't even think I was 15 when I got the tickets. But then John Bonham died, all the concerts were canceled, and I never did see them. Which is okay, because I always thought of Zeppelin as being a much better studio group. Like their studio albums are much better than their live stuff. I have never been a big fan of their live stuff or their live concerts. I just find them sloppy. sloppy. There are a few exceptions to that rule, obviously, but the most notable one is the one that they did with Jason Bonham not too long ago. I thought that was really well done, and it was a great concert, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. But normally speaking, I am not a big, huge live Zeppelin fan. Much prefer the Who, which shows because I have 6 live Who concerts and a huge volume of their live albums. Anyways, we are here today to talk about the legendary Led Zeppelin, one of the great rock bands of history. And so we're going to start by doing the least favorite, and then we will finish up by doing the most favorite. And then I just want to reiterate again, these are only my personal feelings about the albums. It doesn't mean that I think, oh, that's their best album by far, or that's their best album, or this is their worst album, or that's their worst album. Doesn't mean that. It means they're my favorites. And because they're my favorites, they impact me differently than they would impact you. You may be impacted by a certain album greatly and can't understand why it only finishes 4th or 5th with me, because it didn't impact me the same way. I can't be impacted by the albums you listen to the way you listen to them, because I'm not you. So that's just the way it is. So please don't take offense. I mean, your ranking of them may be perfectly great, and I am not here to question that. I'm just here to give you my own and talk about these great albums. Okay, so we're going to start out with the least favorite of albums, and it really, it's really the least favorite for the obvious reasons. There's nothing to dislike about this album. Coda. It's the last Zeppelin album released, the last studio album ever released. The band had already been passed. Like, John Bonham was already gone at this point in time. These were just songs that they took from different eras that hadn't been previously released, and they put them together on this album to try and give people some Zeppelin. I'm not really sure how Zeppelin felt about this album. I know, being a Rush fan that I am, that if somebody was to do this with Rush, I would be not happy at all, and I'm pretty sure the members of Rush would not be happy at all either. That's why Rush is kind of special in a way, in that they never had any leftover material, and any leftover material they had, they always said they destroyed it because they didn't want it coming out later in this kind of fashion as second stage. It was either first stage or no stage, and that's the way I like it. And Rush and Zeppelin do have that in common, in that the drummer died, band was finished. Rush's drummer died, band was finished. And that's the way it should be, I think. So, let's see about this album here. It does have some good tracks on it. We're Gonna Groove. I really like this song. When I first heard it, it was the first track on the album, and I thought, oh wow, this is good. This is good. I like that quite a bit. Poor Tom, I like that as well. Not as much, but I did like it. I Can't Quit You Baby, that kind of reminds me of their first album, and I just never warmed up to that album as much as I probably should. Walter's Walk, pretty unmemorable song. Ozone Baby, didn't mind that. Darlene, it's okay. Bonzo's Montreux, is that how they say it? I don't know. Montreux, I think. It's okay. And Wearing and Tearing, and they're okay. The second side is not as, or the last 4 aren't as good as the first 4. To me, the big 2 songs, We're Gonna Groove and Poor Tom, and then after that, it's a roll the dice. But for an album released by a band that was defunct at the time, it's not a bad album. I have listened to it on occasion. I don't listen to it much anymore, but I did when I first got it. So coming in at number 9, Coda. So coming in at number you'll have to forgive me, I'm still suffering some effects from being sick last week. So if I cough a little bit, I apologize for that. So we're talking about this album, The Presence, coming in at number 8. I think this album is better than I thought it was going to be. I really, of course, love Achilles' Last Stand. It's got to be one of the great Led Zeppelin classics. The rest of the album, it's okay. Nobody's Fault But Mine. I like that a lot. Candy Store Rock, I don't mind that. And it's not a bad album, but it doesn't. I don't think it measures up to some of the other albums in the discography. But I kind of don't really like the cover of this album much either. It's four people sitting around looking at this monolith. Yeah, kind of weird. I never really cared for that. So anyways, this album comes in at number 8, The Presence. The third album from the bottom, or number 7 if you prefer, is this album. And I know I'm going to take a little bit of a hit from people who think this is one of the great Led Zeppelin albums. I'm not sure why I don't like it that much. I think it's a little bit too bluesy for me. I mean, it's got some really good tracks. Good Times, Bad Times. Baby, I'm Gonna Leave You. Dazed and Confused. Communication Breakdown, of course. I Can't Quit You, Baby. These are all pretty solid tracks. But they're not among my favorite Led Zeppelin songs. I don't think there's a song on this album that fits into that category, but these guys look so young here too. It's pretty amazing. I love the cover. It's a great cover and a great debut album. Fantastic debut album. It's just not one of my favorite Zeppelins. Like I said, there's maybe a little bit too bluesy for my taste. And I've had this album off and on for years. I had it in original vinyl form, and then I got rid of it, and then I had it in a cassette form, and I got rid of it, and then I actually may still have it, I don't know. And then I got it, last year I got it in CD form, but when I opened it up to play it, it had Led Zeppelin 2 in there, which was kind of funny. So then I got it again maybe a few months ago. So again, for a debut album, fantastic. But not. I think Zeppelin did much better stuff after this too. So that's my number 7. So the top 6 are all very good albums. I don't have Zeppelin for me doesn't have a master album. I know that surprises people, but I don't have one of them in my master collection of albums. But most of the next 6 albums are all ones. The first 3 were probably less than that, but the next 6 are all pretty much ones. We start with this album, Houses of the Holy. Now, on a given day, this album can move up quite a bit, because when I first got this album, I liked it a lot. It hasn't held up as much as some of the other albums over time for me, but still a really good album. The tracks on here that I really like the most. Not ones that, nothing unusual here. I like Dancing Days. I like Dia Maker. I like No Quarter, and I like The Ocean. The last 4 songs on it, really good stuff. Song Remains the Same. Kind of reminds me of the Song Remains the Same live stuff, and I was never big on that. So kind of I don't know. It's a bit of an emotional problem that I have with that song, so it doesn't really hurt the song, but it doesn't really help it either. Rain Song's okay. Over the Hills and Far Away, great track, and The Grunge are all good tracks. So this is a solid album. A solid album with probably not a really lot of bad stuff on it, like probably none really. I know some people kind of crap on Dia Maker. They don't like it. They don't think it suits Led Zeppelin. But the part of the thing I like about Zeppelin, and the reason they're higher than they probably would be with me, is that they're not just a blues, heavy metal, hard rock band, which is what a lot of people want them to be. But I don't think they are. I think they have more range than that, and they will try different things. They've tried different things on different albums. And this song is, people think it's kind of a reggae kind of poppy thing, but you know what? It's Rush did this as well on their albums, and I liked it from them too. Not afraid to experiment, and that to me is progressive, and that's what I like, progressive music. So great album. This was of course produced by Jimmy Page as well. So most of the stuff he produces was better quality. I think he had a real feel for their music, in my estimation. So Houses of the Holy coming in at number 6. Okay, so the next album up coming in at number 5 probably can do a lot better and probably will do a lot better. It's still relatively new to me. It's been in my playlist. It was the last of the Zeppelin albums that I had owned and had not really knew all the tracks on. And it's a double album too, so we're talking about Physical Graffiti. So its placement here at the number 5 spot is more indicative, I think, of it being not around as long as some of the other albums for me, so it's not going to get as much levity. I mean, Custard's Pie is a great track. I like the Rover. Houses of the Holy, which is kind of funny that it's on an album. Like, they have an album, Houses of the Holy, but they have the track on this album. It's kind of weird. Kashmir, of course, is one of the legendary Led Zeppelin songs, and maybe my favorite Led Zeppelin song. So that pulls this album up quite a bit. In the Light, Boneyard, Down by the Seaside, 10 Years Gone, Night Flight, The Wonton Song, Boogie with Stu, Black Country Woman, Sick Again. Like, there's just a lot of really good tracks on here. And I have to say, most of these tracks, I've listened to this album now maybe 3 or 4 times through. I like them, but they just don't have enough time behind them to really make an impact on how I feel about the album overall. Against some of these albums who I've been listening to for years, they're just not going to be able to compete at this point in time. But still, they competed enough to finish ahead of Houses of the Holy, and I think part of that reason is because I kind of soured on Houses of the Holy over the few years. I think it's a bit of a burnout issue with it, and so this album is fresher and newer, and just for today it ended up in 5th spot. So Physical Graffiti in 5th. Now we're getting into the bottom 4, which are pretty strong stuff, man. These 4, they could have switched out. All 4 of them are capable of winning the top spot. But for today, we're going to go with this one. And I know I'm going to take some hits. What? Led Zeppelin 4 in 4th spot? That doesn't make no sense. But you know what? It's burned out. That's just what it is. The album has been overkill. Like, Black Dog is a great song. It was always one of my... I gotta clean my lens here. It was always one of my favorite Led Zeppelin tracks, but it's just played too much. I'm just tired of it. I don't want to hear it anymore. And that even goes even more for Rock and Roll, which is a song I haven't wanted to hear any more of for years now. The Battle of Evermore is okay. Stairway to Heaven is one of the legendary Led Zeppelin tracks. Many people consider it the greatest song of all time. I'm not disputing any of that, but for me, I don't ever want to hear the song again. I'm just tired of it. I never want to hear it again. So, and then the flip side, I actually like better. That's more recent than it was. Like, if you went back 10 years, it would never have been the second side would never have beat the first side. But now it does, because I'm not as burned out with the songs and they're fresher to me. Misty Mountain Hop, of course, that's always been one of my favorite Zeppelin songs. I still like it. It's a bit burned out, but it's not too bad. Four Sticks, good tune. Going to California and When the Levee Breaks are probably my 2 favorite songs on this album right now. I don't know if they're my favorite Led Zeppelin songs for this album over its history, but definitely for now they're right there, and they pulled the album up, if you ask me, both of them. So the album, I was when I was doing it, the ranking, I had it up against the previous 2 albums, and I actually had it below the 2 of them, and I thought, nah, I can't do it. The Physical Graffiti haven't been around long enough for that to happen, and the other album is just as burned out as it. So, and if you have 2 burned out albums, it's the least burned out. Well, they're actually both about burned out, about the same. This one's just a better album, and I just feel that it's a better album. It's never really been my favorite Zeppelin album. I think it's probably because it's just played too much, and that's all there is to it. Okay, so we're going to go to the top three. This one was burned out for a long time. It's kind of made a little bit of a comeback, and overall I think it's just a better album than Led Zeppelin 4, in my opinion. The sound on Led Zeppelin 4 is better. The production on Led Zeppelin 4 is better than this album. This album is kind of a mess, actually, in some ways. Talking about Led Zeppelin 2, I do not like the cover. It looks like a photograph they took and that stapled to the front of the album, and then took another photograph of the album. So not really that great of an album cover. It starts out with "Whole Lot of Love," which was probably one of my favorite Zeppelin songs early on, as it is with many people. "What You Need" and what Is and What Should Never Be was another track I liked quite a bit early on. The Lemon Song has always been up there for me. "Thank You," I like that tune. "Heartbreaker" kind of reminds me of Rush's "What You're Doing," and I was never a huge fan of either of them. So "Living, Loving Maid" and She's Just a Woman. Yeah, that's a great track. But again, overplayed. "Ramble On" is probably the best track on this album. I've always thought it was the best track on this album. I have no reason to change my mind about that. "Moby Dick," showcasing John Bonham at his best, I think. And "Bring It On Home," which I think is probably the most underrated song on this album, and deep cut, and is probably the reason this album is as high as it is. It's bring it back up, because it's not burned out for me. I still like to play that song on occasion. So yeah, just another great album by a great group, and coming in at number 3. This album has been number 1 for me before, but I've owned some version of this album for, I'm going to go back to the early 1980s, so somewhere over 40 years I've owned some version of this album, so it is of course suffering a little bit of burnout as well. So number 3, Led Zeppelin 2. Now, you're both wondering, oh my god, I can't believe he has the next 2 in the top 2 spots. Which one's going to finish number 1? Well, one of them was the first album I ever owned. I got it, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I got this right when it came out and was going on the tour and everything, and then he died, and it never happened. And I liked this album quite a bit. For a long period of time, it was my favorite of their albums, because it was new when it came out. It had an impact on me immediately, emotionally, and I felt part of the time period of this album. But it's waned over the years, largely due to the fact that I've had more chance with a lot of the other albums for a longer period of time. I think this production on this album is really good. It's a more varied album than a lot of their other albums. It's going to come in at number 2, so I'm not going to. We know what number 1's going to be now. But anyways, In Through the Outdoor, great track, great tracks on this. In the Evening and Carousel Amber are just fantastic, progressive kind of sounding bluesy stuff, like just really good. Southbound, Sorad's Okay, Fool in the Rain, maybe the biggest hit on the album. I like it quite a bit. A lot of people don't like the song Hot Dog, but I like rockabilly, and I think this song is really good for that, and it brings out that part of them. All of My Love, kind of when it came out, we thought, oh, it's another Stairway to Heaven sounding song. It had some of that feel to it, and I still think it carries a little bit of that. I don't think it has quite the burnout that song has. And I'm Gonna Crawl, which is okay. It's a little different than a lot of their stuff, but there's no real bad track on this album. This is a solid album, so Originally, when I got it yesterday, I was going to put it in the 4th or 5th spot, and then I listened to the entire album. I thought, wow, I forgot how much I like that. Wow, I forgot about that song. Wow. Excuse me. So it moved up because of that. In days past, it would have been number one. For the first 20 years or so, it was number one. Most of the time, sometimes Led Zeppelin 2 was in there. But for today, it's coming in at number 2. So number 1 was going to be this album. I'm pretty sure I knew that, but I challenged it against them. I think the thing about this album I love the cover, of course. It's got all kinds of interesting things on it, and I like the back part too. It's also very different than the original other three first albums, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 4. Not as heavy as them. More folky sounding. Some more acoustic bits in here, which I like quite a bit. And it was never going to be number 1. Like 20 years ago, it wasn't even close. It was in the 3 or 4. When I first heard it, I didn't like it because I thought it doesn't sound like Zeppelin. It's too folky. It's too acoustic. It's not nearly as strong as the other albums. But that's the very thing that's made it grown for me. I mean, other than it starts out with the Immigrant Song, which is one of the big Zeppelin tracks in their history. Friends, I like. Celebration Day, great track. Since I've Been Loving You, I love that track. Out on the Tiles, I always like that. Gallows Pole is probably one of my underrated Zeppelin tracks that I just love that song. It's probably my favorite on this album, actually. Tangerine, there's the song that I think quintifies this album as being more of a softer album than the other ones. The Tangerine, I think, is kind of the song that people think of when they think of this album. It's the one I think of anyways. That's the Way. That is an underrated track. I love this track. It's top 2, 3 on the album for me. Hats Off to Roy Harper. I even actually kind of like this kind of quirky song. And this was again produced by Jimmy Page, as I think most of them were. Were they not all produced by him? I just want to check something here. Yep, it was. So I think all of their albums were produced by Jimmy Page, as it should be. He was a session musician for years, so he understood the production, and he seemed to have gotten the best out of all of the songs too. So anyway, so for number 1, Led Zeppelin 3 was going to be number 1 today. I had little doubt of that. I stacked it up against the other ones to see, but a strong album. Could it be a master album? I don't think any of the Zeppelin albums really strike me that way, and I know I'm going to take hits for that. That's fine. Everybody sees things differently. That's just for me. But still a great album, and I like all the tracks on it quite a bit. So let's reiterate them all. There will be no honorable mentions, obviously, because we don't do that in the rankings, do we? So coming in at number 1, before I drop them all on the floor, actually I got them all mixed up now. I don't know how I managed to do that, but I did. There we go. Now holy mackerel. Somebody should take me out for a walk. I'm just messing this all up here. Okay, let's try this again. Get them in the order that we had them. I don't know how they got out of order. Doesn't make any sense, but it did. Okay, so coming in at number 1, Led Zeppelin 3. Coming in at number 2, In Through the Outdoor, their last album released with John Bonham as alive on it. Coming in at number 3, number 2. I always want to say that. Coming in at number 4, or Sozo if you prefer that. I prefer number 4, so I'll stick with that. Then the next album up would be Physical Graffiti, the double album that is still fairly new to me. That was number 5, right? Number 6, Houses of the Holy, great album. This kind of reminds me of H.G. Wells, the H.G. Wells movie, because of the way they've got it set up on the cover. Time Machine. That's what I was thinking of. Led Zeppelin 1 coming in at number 7. The Presence, number 8. And the last album will be Coda, which is the album of collected bits that they found and released as a studio album after the death of John Bonham. What year was this released, by the way? I don't even remember. I have a feeling it was 1982. Could have been 1982. Yep, I was right. So they waited a couple years, and then I guess people were starving for Zeppelin, so they put this out. I don't know that. It was produced by Jimmy Page, so he had a hand in it, and probably they wanted to give people some Zeppelin stuff, something to hang their hat on. So there you go. So there you have it. My ranking of the Led Zeppelin catalog. I know it's a bit longer than I normally do, but such a great catalog. I just wanted to give it some attention. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation today. If you did, please like and subscribe. It's much appreciated. And we'll be back next week with another favorites episode on Wednesday Night Favorites. Take care. Bye.